space left in the end for discussion. Our next presentation is by Professor Alim Yilmaz. We're going to speak on Islamophobia and as an Islamophobic perception. Professor Yilmaz is a professor at the Faculty of Political Science and Public Administration at Istanbul Medina University.
Okay.
Professor Ali, floor is yours. You have about 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. First, greetings from Istanbul. I think it's a good session we are going on. Now I am going to mainly talk on Islamophobia, but in a theoretical framework. So then, in relation with xenophobic and racism, okay. So then I need to make some clarification on some basic concepts and some definitions I should cite. So we know that affirming anti-Muslim sentiment, anti-Muslim behavior and speech became known as Islamophobia since 1990s. From this time, especially studies in literature on anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiment, including its history and causes, are increasingly being studied, as I said, in the academic literature. So here my aim is to summarize the literature to better understand Islamophobia. So, and of course, to comprehend Islamophobia, one must first try to understand xenophobia. There is a lot of written about how xenophobia, racism, and nativism all stem from the same problem. Okay, so then I mean, to understand Islamophobia, we need to understand the related concepts, including racism, nativism, and xenophobia. First, xenophobia, as we know, is the fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners. Despite their similarities between xenophobia and racism, there are some differences. This is a global trend in nations, in fact, not only in the West. So we cannot say that, yes, in the West there is a tendency, an emotional tendency about Muslims and Islam, but really it is interesting, in the form of racism or nativism, there's a global trend we are living now. Racism in this regard assumes that racial differences lead to intrinsic superiority of one race. It may be the German, the West, the England, the US, the Turkey, etc. It doesn't matter. So, as I told, xenophobia is a fear of strangers. This is the basic assumption. So, although these are, I mean, xenophobia and racism are distinct concepts, they are commonly used, okay, interchangeably in the literature. Fear of strangers shares a semantic overlap with nativism also, nativism, and it favors native Stevens over immigrants of all ages. This is a basic problem because we are facing, both in Europe, in West, in Turkey, etc., a movement of immigration. So having a xenophobic attitude towards strangers is a truth, not just in the West, but in the East also, in Islamic world also. So many factors have led to the global rise in anti-immigrant xenophobia, in anti-Muslim xenophobia, in Russia also. It is really interesting. So anti-immigrant rhetoric, in this sense, in the media, and politics, is a major social issue, I think. This is a real question. It's a major social issue in countries where migration is an issue. So then we face the problem, the question of migration in Turkey. In Turkey also we have a same problem, okay? In Europe, in the West, in the United States, etc., even in Russia and other Muslim world. So here I want to underline the concept of xenophobia, that is the majority's intolerance of newcomers or outsiders. This is the basic point. And it labels the other as maybe Muslim, Jew, barbarian, or as we see in the literature, the underdeveloped. So these concepts really are related to nativism, racism, and xenophobia. So all forms of community prejudice, including racism, tend to exclude this and subjugate, or let me say, forced to submit the other through sharing feelings. So we have a global immigration policy in the worldwide, which allow us to reassess outsider stereotypes in relation to Islamophobia and racism, and of course xenophobia. Pro or anti-immigrant policies are concentrated mainly, unfortunately, in EU, European Union, and USA. The main issue is that xenophobia, unfortunately, has become a value. Not only in Europe, but in North America and in some Muslim countries also, Muslim majority countries. So I here need to give two examples in terms of, or with reference to the concept of post-truth or post-politics in USA and in the process of Brexit in the United Kingdom. There have increased worldwide violence after especially some developments in the United States and with the process of Brexit in the United Kingdom. In the USA, xenophobia has raised in both language and behavior, especially when we consider Trump's presidential campaign. Okay, it is I think, turning point. I mean, Trump's argument that immigrants are not people, they are not human. In his campaign, he said that the immigrants, who are the immigrants? The Muslims and non-Europeans, etc. They are not even human, according to Trump. So here the cultural structure amplify statement. In these views, xenophobia is a form of, turns to be a form of violence, and it served the Brexit campaign also. If you consider the arguments in the Brexit process, you will see that the former Foreign Minister Boris Johnson, and now Prime Minister, of course, he and other some politicians were part in this process. And we, when we consider some statistical data, we see that some statistical data were distorted to support their arguments to make a Brexit process. So in this process, the public was really duped. The media echoes these arguments. On the other side, Trump really is very notable figure. I think he represents a turning point both in Islamophobia, to understand the movement of Islamophobia and racism. You know, Trump paved the way for anti-truth politics with this election campaign. He used a unit rhetoric, I think. I think these examples, these two main examples, shows how Western politicians influences both foreigners and native-born residents in these countries, in the United States and EU. Of course, then after, xenophobia has an antithesis. anti-black racism subjugates like Afrophilia, allophilia, allosemitism, and Islamophilia. I mean that because of the movement of the xenophobic attitudes like Islamophobia, in the West, we also simultaneously observe that there is a antithesis discourse which was raised, and this is a positive example. And Islamophilia, the concept of Islamophilia could be explained this movement, I think. But let me say that this is not a Western social or intellectual trend. Other ideas have a strong xenophobic connotations, not from the West, but from the Muslims also. There are xenophobic approaches, unfortunately. Those few phrases, I think, describe xenophobia as a human trait. Okay, it's related to maybe human nature, the xenophobic attitude. It is related to ethnocentrism, populism, and nationalism. Also, nativism, I think. So let me pass to the concept of xenophobia of Islam. The term Islamophobia, as I told, really was originally used in a paper by Rudim Trust, which researches interracial relation in England. The article was headlined as Islamophobia, a challenge for us all. I prefer you to read this article if you don't. So despite the lack of a standard definition, it should be interpreted as having negative views or feelings toward Islam or Muslims. So this is the definition of Islamophobia, I think. Then, contrary to common opinion, not all criticism of Islam and Muslims is anti-Muslim or Islamophobic. Then Muslims should regard that, yes, there is a case, it's a matter of fact that there is an attitude toward Muslims and Islam in the West in the form of Islamophobia, but we could not say that all kind of criticisms could be considered as anti-Muslim or Islamic movement or xenophobic movement. Then the term Islamophobia refers to a wide range of attitudes and feelings towards individuals and groups of people, similar to homophobia and xenophobia. So Islamophobia, like racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism, all is included in the same framework, is a fear of Muslims. It is interesting. But of course, not only Muslim, but also Islam. I think there is a difference between these two fears. Fears of Muslim and Islam is not identical in this sense. Other undesirable emotions like, hostility, suspicion can be understood through Islamophobia. So then it creates an anxiety and rejection among Muslims. So Islamophobia could be characterized as a fear of Islam in Europe, in America, as well as actions of hostility and assault against Muslims. And indeed, Islamophobia can be caused by several variables, the most common being cultural, historical, political, economical, and also theological. So xenophobia in relation to Islamophobia is a long-standing manifestation of Islamophobia in the West. Islamophobia is a form of prejudice against Muslims, whether believers or not. Yeah, I mean, if you are regarded as a Muslim or as a part of Islamic culture, it doesn't matter whether you are a good believer or even a believer you are a Muslim. It doesn't change. The xenophobic attitude will take you a target. So in this way, Muslims were treated as treating alliance, regardless of their national origins. They may be Pakistanians, Turks, Arabs, etc. So there are several reasons for why a person develops a fear of another.
Mr. Alim, sorry for interruption. Can you conclude in 2 minutes?
Oh, really? So then let me make some concluding remarks, okay, in 5 minutes if possible. So,
yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So then as a result, historical awareness perception of identity manifests our self as self and other, we and them. Throughout history, human groups have survived by developing their own set of moral ideas also. And in the course of exploring or seizing new lands, human societies clashed, resulting in massive conflicts and destruction. Human travel across space is linked to the rise and fall of great civilization in history. Large, powerful armies attempting to conquer the world are certain to cause disagreements between opposing viewpoints. So to protect what one has and to get what one lacks are thought to be the major motivations for war throughout history. Religious, linguistic, cultural, ethnic differences have always, unfortunately, existed and will continue to exist, is a matter of fact, I think. So people from all over the world have always been drawn to the West when it comes to modernization, including Muslims. For settled communities, the immense turmoil is the East has become repellent. Other Eastern societies, especially Muslims, are drawn to the West by its growth in administration, politics, trade, technology, as well as its excellent living conditions. That's why Muslims migrate to the West. So I am concluding, but blaming the West is pointless, I think. Okay, and promotes the inclination to externalize the real issue in the East, comparable to the xenophobia that has grown in the West, should be understood in relation to the main political, social, intellectual, and economical problems in the Muslim world. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much, Professor Alim, for a very informed and well-researched presentation on the important topic of Islamophobia.